Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 64. So guys, this week I am tackling the first true batch of the War of the Bounty Hunters massive 34 issue crossover event. Now, if anyone who's been listening for more than like a month will know that episode 60 is when I actually tackled the other War of the Bounty Hunters batch, which was called the Prelude. So they're preludes which basically were just wrapping up the storylines that were going on in Bounty Hunters, Star Wars, Darth Vader and Doctor Aphra, and then just giving a prelude to the War of the Bounty Hunters in its own little mini-series. So I tackled that in episode 60. I'd say go back and listen to that, and if you haven't, it's not really the end of the world. It's just quite nice to wrap everything up to get to this point. But this is the first true batch of comics that are specifically contributing to the War of the Bounty Hunters storyline, and this is where things really start to get going. There's a lot of connections, there's a lot of cool things in here, and for any new listeners, just to clarify, I'm going to give you basically the footnote versions of the stories for each of these comics, so you don't have to pick up the comics if you don't want to, but if you do pick up the comics, you still get a lot out of them, because I don't give out much dialogue or some of the certain side plots that are going on. But while I do that, I also give explanations onto a lot of the connective tissue among it. You know, certain characters or ships or planets that pop up that you may recognise and you're not sure where from. I will give you in the canon context where you may have heard from that, where else it shows up, and a little bit of information like that. So that's what you can expect from this. And so to begin with, the reading order for these, and it's going to change each month in essence, because it's not just standard, you know, this one first, this one. It's not, I originally thought it was just going to be the same general running order for all of them. It's not. It's going to change every month. So this month, for the first batch for the War of the Bounty Hunters, you're going to want to read War of the Bounty Hunters 1, Bounty Hunters number 13, Star Wars 14, Darth Vader 13 and Doctor Aphra 11. And for clarity, the Star Wars and the Darth Vaders are both the third run of these, so they started in 2020, and the Doctor Aphra run is the second run of Doctor Aphra, which also started in 2020. Bounty Hunters is its own thing. There haven't been other runs of Bounty Hunters, but there was like prequel comics in a sense, like Target Vader. But, you know, I tackled all that sort of information when I did episode 60, when I did the prelude of all the Bounty Hunters. So for all that sort of information, you probably want to go check that out so I don't ramble on here too much. And if there are certain characters that pop up or things that you maybe don't fully recognise, or you think that I should have mentioned that, check that episode 60, because chances are with characters like Bib Fortuna and things like that, I have actually given background information, and I don't want to just give you guys the same information every month, because then people will just get sick of me saying the same thing over and over again. So with that all in mind, let's move on to the first comic of these 5, and this is War of the Bounty Hunters 1, and it is called Most Wanted. The writer for this is Charles Soule, the artist is Luke Ross, the colour artist is Neeraj Menon, and this issue was out on the 2nd of June 2021. I also want to clarify this crossover event. All of these episodes are going to be taking place between 3 and 4 years after the Battle of Yavin, so it's basically just between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So with that in mind, let's get on to the crawl for War of the Bounty Hunters 1. Boba Fett claimed the bounty of notorious smuggler and rebel officer Han Solo. But Solo was stolen from Fett on Nar Shaddaa. Who would dare steal from the galaxy's most dangerous bounty hunter? This single act may change the galaxy forever. And I just wanted to add in here that, as I said, this comic is actually called Most Wanted, and that is a little hint to something. I won't say yet, I'll leave it to the very end of this, but to clarify for any listeners, this is your warning. These are going to be riddled with spoilers, as although I'm giving the footnotes versions of what happens in these, I am going to be revealing the endings. So if you want a little hint and you don't want to go any further, Most Wanted is your hint for what happens in this, but I'll explain that more later. So let's get on with the narrative of this. So it starts with a hooded figure getting their hands on Han Solo frozen in carbonite, and they are aware that Boba Fett was the last person to have them. It is confirmed that the doctor who had hold of Solo in carbonite actually managed to stabilise him so that Solo didn't die, and apparently Solo could survive in carbonite for years. Now that was referencing War of the Bounty Hunters Alpha, where basically the carbonite was starting to, not quite defrost, but something was going wrong and it would have turned Solo into goo in essence, and the Doctor was trying to stabilise that while Boba Fett went off and did a job for him, and then Boba came back and Han Solo was gone. So for clarity, Han Solo frozen carbonite is seemingly now going to be stable for the rest of this arc. So it cuts away from where Solo is, and it shows Boba Fett on Nar Shaddaa, where we last saw him. He's speaking to a bartender and says that he worked with a complicated client to get Solo, which kind of alludes to, Boba Fett doesn't really like working for the Empire, one would assume. Obviously, in the situation during the Galactic Civil War, or rather the Empire's reign for, about 23, 24 years of Empire's reign, you can't really say no to the Empire unless you're willing to be a rebel, and obviously Boba Fett working for Vader, probably one of the only people he may be afraid of. So it's good to know this little line of dialogue that Boba Fett, calling the Empire complicated means that he's not necessarily aligned with the Empire. It shows there's other people in the bar and someone is looking at this bounty puck, and it shows that the bounty on Boba is massive. So this person decides they're going to try and kill Boba Fett. Boba manages to see them before they do and kills them. He then heads to his ship, Slave 1, and then he hears a little beep and then a thermal detonator goes off and knocks him off his feet. It shows that the bounty hunter Zuckuss is there, and he's also there with 4LOM. They both ask for Solo, and Boba Fett tries to evade the question. He activates the blasters on his ship as he flies up with a jetpack. It destroys part of 4LOM, and Zuckuss is hanging off the edge, and Boba Fett just kicks him clean off the rest of the platform, and then picks up 4LOM's head. Now for clarity, Zuckuss, and I normally call him 4LOM because, 4LOM, but all the characters seem to refer to him as 4LOM, so I will probably end up calling him 4LOM, even though he's not really in these comics that much going forward, just because 4LOM is easier to say, but I think the maybe correct pronunciation is 4LOM, but you would recognise both Zuckuss and 4LOM in The Empire Strikes Back. They are among the bounty hunters along with Boba Fett who are tasked in finding Han Solo and the rebels. So you've got Bosk there, you've got 4LOM, Zuckuss, Dengar, IG-88 and Boba Fett. And Zuckuss is a species called Gand, and there's not much known about them in canon apart from they can somewhat see the future, and 4LOM is a protocol droid, and he was created to look like the Gand. So in essence, where C-3PO is a protocol droid who looks quite like humans, 4LOM is a protocol droid who looks a lot like the Gand, which are these quite big bug-eyed humanoids. They are in the odd Star Wars adventure comic as well, but in the canon at the moment, the two of them haven't really been in a huge amount else. I think in Legends they're in a bit more stuff, but in the canon, flushing out bounty hunters is exactly what this big crossover event is for. It's also worth adding here about the Slave 1. I've mentioned it in prior episodes of Star Wars Comics and Canon, but just in case, the Slave 1 is a modified Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft. Obviously, it was Jango Fett's ship, you saw that in Attack of the Clones, and then obviously Boba inherited it after Mace Windu killed Jango Fett. I also want to flag here, there's a lot of uproar on the internet, maybe it was a couple of weeks ago now, but it was still a lot of uproar because people were getting butthurt that Disney apparently changed the name of Boba's ship from Slave 1 to Boba Fett's ship. I want to clarify, that isn't the case. With Lego stuff, they changed it to call it Boba Fett's ship, and also on certain other merchandise, they called it Boba Fett's ship. The reason they did that is not because of some weird political correctness going wrong and AY and not saying the word slave. The reason is because the majority of Star Wars fans, especially younger fans who maybe have seen The Mandalorian or seen other things that Boba Fett is in, won't immediately know that the Slave 1 is Boba Fett's ship. And especially if you're a parent and your kid really likes Star Wars and you're not into Star Wars as much as they are, you're not going to know the Slave 1 is necessarily Boba Fett's ship. So it's just a lot easier for people to be able to get a ship when it's called the ship's owner. So I just want to flag that just because I was seeing that online a lot and it was kind of getting on my nerves because people just want any reason to get angry at Disney, even though we've got so many cool things coming out because of Disney. But anyway, putting that all aside, so continuing with the story. So Boba Fett, after he pulls off 4LOM's head, he plugs it into his ship and it finds out that Jabba actually put a bounty out on him, so he heads for Jabba's palace on Tatooine. As he lands his ship, he then walks towards Jabba's palace and he throws 4-Lomp's head off the edge. He approaches Bib Fortuna and questions why Jabba put a bounty out on him. It's confirmed that Jabba put a bounty onto Boba Fett because he thought he sold Solo to someone else. It's clear that Solo isn't with Boba Fett anymore, so he just thought, well, you sold him somewhere else, and Jabba had first dibs on it, essentially. And so Boba says, well, where is Jabba? Let me speak to him and clear it up. Bib says, you can't, he's not here at the moment. So it cuts to where Jabba actually is, and he's speaking to the other Hutts. Now, the Hutts, they're not only a crime family, syndicate, and massive, they have their own thing called the Hutt Council, which at this time Jabba is the head of. Now, Jabba is around 600 years old when we see him in the original trilogy. He was born approximately 600 years before the Battle of Yavin, so at the time of his death, he was like 604 years old, and Hutts live, I think, to past 1,000 years, because there is mention in this little part of the comic that there is a Hutt called Marlowe, and he's 1,000 years old and he's starting to go a bit senile, they mentioned to him, and there's quite a cool thing, I'll mention that in a sec. But the other Hutts that are there with Jabba, there's Boku, there's Mika, and then there is Marlowe, this old gentleman. And to clarify, Jabba's name isn't Jabba the Hutt, it's just, how people reference him. Jabba's full name is actually Jabba Desilagic Tier. I'm not going to try and spell that, but if you want to find out how to pronounce it properly and spell that, go look it up. But if you ever need to know Jabba's full name, Jabba Desilagic Tier. Now, the fun little thing here is the reason we know that Marlowe's going a bit senile is because he's falling asleep in this meeting where the Hutts are trying to work out what to do about, if this certain crime syndicate, they've returned, who is it, is the leader of them gone, all these things, which I'll get into at the end of this issue. And Marlowe just kind of snaps awake and he mentions Chancellor So. Now, Chancellor So is actually the Chancellor human in charge of the High Republic back in the High Republic era. So anyone who's paying attention to the High Republic books that are out and the High Republic comics, the Chancellor at the time is called Chancellor So, and she also has 2 creatures that are with her, which he references as well. So he's 1,000 years old and he's confusing where and really when he actually is. But that's just quite a nice little nod to the High Republic, I thought. And this Hutt conversation basically ends with them discussing whether or not they should act upon this new criminal syndicate coming to light. They're all a little bit wary of it because it may sort of destabilize the power dynamic, but Jabba says that he's not overly concerned. We'll just kind of watch and we'll go because they've received an invitation to go to this gathering. So back on Tatooine, Boba Fett sees the invite, Bib Fortuna shows it to him, and the invite confirms that it is actually Crimson Dawn who has got Han Solo, and they are the ones organising this big gathering. Now, Crimson Dawn, you guys will know about Crimson Dawn for 2 reasons. One is kind of vaguely the Clone Wars, but much more specifically is Solo a Star Wars story. So the Crimson Dawn, it was actually started by Darth Maul near the end of the Clone Wars, and Dryden Voss was the public figure, and he's the sort of antagonist in Solo a Star Wars story, but Maul was behind the scenes playing puppet master in a sense. And Maul basically took out and threatened many of the other crime syndicates, and in the Clone Wars he created something called the Shadow Collective, which was him, I think it was like the Pikes, the Black Sun, the Hutts were all sort of involved because, Maul was fearsome. And then towards the end of the Clone Wars, when everything started to kind of split apart, Crimson Dawn kind of rose from the ashes in a sense, and a lot of the crime families kind of backed away and things. So obviously at the end of Solo a Star Wars story, there's a certain character who becomes the leader in some ways, and that character is Kira. Now Kira, funnily enough, is in a prequel book to Solo a Star Wars story, and that prequel book is called Most Wanted, which is the name of this comic. And now you're going to get, it's going to be really, really cool. That hooded figure at the start, who's also in at the end of this comic, is Kira. So Kira from Solo a Star Wars story is now the full leader of Crimson Dawn because Maul isn't around anymore. I won't spoil why he's not. It's not in the comics. I'm not even going to confirm where. But if you watch all of the Star Wars animated series, you will find out why he's not necessarily about there. And that's what I'm going to say in that regard. But so Kira is at the top of Crimson Dawn. They've not been active for years and years, and she is the one pulling the strings, and she's the one who basically has Solo. So to clarify with this invite that Boba sees that Bib Fortuna shows him, essentially the Hutts were invited to Jakara, and then it shows on Jakara Crimson Dawn's shuttle called the Vermilion lands. It reveals that it is Kira, and it says that Solo is somehow connected to almost every powerful faction in the galaxy. Rebels, the Empire, and everyone in between. You either love him, you hate him, you owe him, or are owed by him, and that's exactly what she needs. And she comments that Han always wanted to save her, and now this is his chance to save her, whether he knows it or not. So that's where War of the Bounty Hunters 1 ends. It is a bombshell, it's amazing, and when I read it I was like, oh my god, that is so cool, because obviously we haven't seen anything to do with Kira since Solo: A Star Wars Story. We don't know if there's going to be any other series that tackle sort of what happened between Solo and Rogue One and things. You know, there's the Lando series that's been announced, but there's no details that have been filled in about that. So finding out that Kira has been alive all this time and is still in the lead of Crimson Dawn is very, very interesting, I must admit. So with that all in mind, we move on to the next issue in this little event, and this is Bounty Hunters number 13. So Bounty Hunters 13 is called Showdown on Smuggler's Moon, which is actually a reference to the second volume of the first batch of the main run of Star Wars comics. God, that's a mouthful. And that volume or arc was also called Showdown on Smuggler's Moon. So once again, that's a reference there. And Chewie and 3PO were actually on the Smuggler's Moon then as well. Now, I tackled that on Star Wars Comics in Canon episode number 13. So make sure you go back and check that out if you so desire. But yeah, this issue, it was written by Ethan Sachs. The artist is Paolo Villanelli, the colour artist is Arif Prianto, and it was released 9th of June 2021. So let's get onto the crawl. Jabba the Hutt has put a bounty on Boba Fett's head. Valance and Dengar have formed a shaky alliance in order to find Fett first. Valance is desperate to save his old friend Han Solo. But the odds are against them. Every hunter in the galaxy will want a piece of Boba Fett, and Dengar may have an agenda of his own. So the comic starts with Valance and Dengar in Nar Shaddaa. Now Dengar has a contact, tells Valance to be careful, and Valance throws the contact over a table. They're then attacked by this contact's goons, and they manage to quickly dispose of them. The contact is named Devono, and while this is happening it shows that Chewie and 3PO are nearby. They mention that they're trying to keep a low profile. They meet this contact, and the contact says, well, you clearly can't keep a low profile. I mean, you don't see Wookiees very often, and a gold-plated protocol droid. You're attracting a lot of attention. 3PO and Chewie do mention their previous time there, and then Chewie catches a scent. Now to clarify, the previous time there, that is in the Showdown on Smuggler's Moon that I mentioned previously. If you want information on that, check out Star Wars Comics and Canon episode 13. Or pick up the comic and read it yourself, either or. So as Chewie catches the scent, Devono runs past, and Chewie attacks Valance. So it cuts to some other characters. There's Taonga and Losha. They're searching for a person called Cadelia with a Nexu. So a Nexu, that is basically it's like a hyena wolf alien thing. You would have seen them in Attack of the Clones. When Anakin, Padme and Obi-Wan are in the pit on Geonosis, the big giant praying mantis looking thing is called an Acklay, that attacks Obi-Wan. The rhino looking thing attacks Anakin, that's called a Reek. And then the, as I said, canine cat wolf thing that attacks Padme with its claws, that is called a Nexu. So in brief, Taonga and Losha are looking for this character Cadelia. Cadelia is the daughter of two people, one of which, her dad, is in one crime family and her mum is in another crime family. These two crime families are fighting a lot. The details are in the rest of the Bounty Hunters arc. I'm not going to go into that. But in essence, the dad orders a bounty onto Cadelia and Valance finds out, doesn't want to kill her, and then protects her and hides her. And obviously while that happens, Taonga, Losha and lots of the other crime families are still trying to find this hidden girl. So these two crime families that have got that daughter in essence, one of them's called the Unbroken Clan and one of them's called Mourner's Wail. So Taonga and Losha are at the Mourner's Wail hideout. There's no Unbroken Clan that are found there, but there's a lot of dead people around them. And then someone aims a blaster at Taonga. Meanwhile, Valance and Chewie are fighting each other, and Chewie then notices Dengar, remembers the time that Dengar electrocuted him about 3 years ago, which was in the Showdown on Smuggler's Moon Star Wars comics arc that I mentioned, and so Chewie throws Dengar pretty damn hard, quite far out of the way. When this happens, Valance then puts his weapons down and says to Chewie, look, I'm not trying to kill you, I'm not trying to fight you, I'm actually trying to save Han, because Han actually saved me. If you want to find out the details about that, you can check out Han Solo Imperial Cadet, which is a mini-series set in the time that Han Solo was in the Empire, which is that sort of bit that you see in Solo: A Star Wars Story. I tackled that in episode 10 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, and then also Target Vader, which is the prequel series to the prequel mini-series to the Bounty Hunters run. That I tackle in episode 49 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so make sure you check those out if you haven't. So Valance then says to Chewie, look, he's going to help Han with all that Chewie's help, and so Chewie shakes his hand, says that he may ask for help later down, but until then, stay out of his way. 3PO is there and is basically just saying what Chewie is saying, because obviously Chewie is roaring and speaking in Shriwook. And one of the things that Chewie says is that he'll rip out Valance's cybernetic arms and beat him to death with him if he gets in Chewie's way, which is quite visual, quite cool. It's quite fun because Chewie is such a lovable character, but he can be quite savage. So while this is happening, it shows back to Taonga, and she's speaking with an old friend of theirs called Lord Kandek. And this Kandek character shows up in the other Bounty Hunters comics as well. As they're talking, they're then ambushed by Crimson Dawn. So it goes back to Valance on Nar Shaddaa, and he's holding that contact Devono off a rooftop by his leg. He doesn't believe that Crimson Dawn are back because they've been gone for so long. Devono says that Crimson Dawn ordered some exotic weapons, they have something really big planned, and then as Valance kind of puts him down and things, he gets decapitated, as in Devono gets decapitated by a sniper. Valance is then hit in the shoulder, and Dengar manages to pull him into cover, and then it shows that there's a character who was the one who was shooting, called Deathstick. Now, to clarify, Deathstick is a really niche character, actually. They've only showed up in canon in a mobile game called Star Wars Uprising, which I haven't played. She is basically a Night Sister. Night Sisters, Asajj Ventress in the Clone Wars is a Night Sister. If you've played the game Jedi Fallen Order, there's a character you meet in that whose name escapes me right now. She is also a Night Sister. It's essentially a clan of witches from Dathomir. Dathomir is where Darth Maul is from. He is a Night Brother, and he is a Zabrak. So there are Zabraks are a species that are quite widespread in the galaxy, but on Dathomir there's a specific breed of Zabrak, which some are in the Night Brother clan, the females, some of them are in the Night Sister clan, but there are other witches around Dathomir and things. Mother Talzin was a famous Night Sister witch, she was the head of the Night Sisters there, and so that's who Deathstick is, basically a bounty hunter that is a Night Sister, or was a Night Sister, who showed up in the mobile game Star Wars Uprising, and she's going to be more prominent in the future comics and things, but I personally don't really know much about her because I have not played that mobile game, and if you're thinking, oh, I'll go pick up that mobile game, you can't. It was only online for like a year and a half or so. It had like story to it and whatnot, but the app servers got shut down, I think in 2016, so if you want more information about her, you're going to have to go on Wikipedia. But yeah, that's where Bounty Hunters number 13 ends, which means we're moving on to the next comic, and this next comic is Star Wars number 14, and it's called Save Solo. Save Solo was written by Charles Soule, the artist is Ramon Rosanas, and the colour artist is Rachel Rosenberg, and this issue was released the 16th of June 2021. So let's do the crawl for this one. Luke Skywalker, Chewbacca, and C-3PO return to the Rebel fleet after failing to locate Boba Fett on Nar Shaddaa, but there is still hope to save their friend Han Solo. Word has at last reached Princess Leia about just where Fett and Solo can be found. So this issue starts on the Falcon, and Leia plays a message from Amilyn Holdo. Now, Amilyn Holdo is a character you should remember from The Last Jedi. She does the famous Holdo maneuver, where she uses hyperspace and crashes into the First Order's dreadnought and things, and just clarify, the only reason that really works in that scenario, and they don't really do it elsewhere in the Star Wars canon apart from once, is because the experimental shields on the Radish ship made it possible, so it's not a very common thing that people do. But Amilyn Holdo, she's in The Last Jedi, and a good place to get some backstory on her is in the Claudia Gray novel Leia, Princess of Alderaan. She's a very interesting character. Claudia Gray describes her as sort of similar to a young Luna Lovegood, and Luna Lovegood is my favourite character in Harry Potter, so if you enjoy Harry Potter stuff, or Luna Lovegood, and or you want to find out some backstory on Leia or Holdo, I do recommend checking out the Leia, Princess of Alderaan book. I was sceptical before reading it, but I wanted to give it a go. It is really, really good. It's about Leia about 3 years before the events of Rogue One and A New Hope, when she's about 16. She's training to become the Queen of Alderaan and things, and she finds out her parents are part of the rebellion, obviously Breha and Bail Organa, and it's her kind of dealing with that. It's a really, really good book. I do recommend it. And fun fact that Amilyn Holdo, her home planet is Gatalenta. So anyway, back to the story. So this message from Holdo confirms that Crimson Dawn are the ones that have got Han Solo. Chewie recognises the name Crimson Dawn, obviously from the Solo a Star Wars story, and he says to talk to Lando, because he was involved then as well. Luke says that he's going to go with Starlight Squadron to find the other rebel cells, because after the Battle of Hoth and after a lot of big battles, the rebels all split apart and hide just in case any of them are getting tailed by the Empire, so it doesn't compromise the entirety of the Rebel Alliance. And a lot of the time the rebel cells split apart, and then it's quite hard to get into contact with each other without messages being intercepted by the Empire. There's a whole storyline about that in these Star Wars comics, and this is the 2020 run by Charles Soule. I haven't tackled these on the show yet because I'm just finishing off the last run of the Star Wars comics, which started in 2016 and finished in 2019, I think. But when I'm done with those, I'll then tackle the earlier arcs that lead up to this. But yeah, essentially Luke goes off with Starlight Squadron, and so Chewie meets up with Lando and Lobot, and Lando agrees to help them. Once Chewie leaves, Lando then contacts Bib Fortuna, saying he's going to give them the talkie droid. So the talkie droid, that, as I said, was in the prior arc of the Star Wars run, and in essence it was the Rebel Alliance kept getting their codes breached by the Empire. They kept getting them read and things, so it would be really hard to send any messages, because if you send an encoded message, the Empire can just crack the code and know exactly what you're saying. So they had to try and find out a way to send messages to each other. They landed on this ancient language that hasn't been spoken for like hundreds of years or something silly, and then there's this one droid in this old museum who happens to know that language, and that's the talkie droid that they're referring to. It's also worth pointing out here that Lando is with Lobot. Now, Lobot in the comics is quite prolific when it comes to, Lando's association with him. But in the films, you do see him in Empire Strikes Back very briefly. He is a bald guy with something that looks like really old school headphones on almost. They go from ear to ear around the back of his head, and it is actually an AJ6 cyborg construct. In Star Wars Rebels, Ezra does come across an old family friend who's a Rhodian, same species as Greedo, and he's got this cyborg construct as well. In very short, it's basically a way to boost the human brain function, but you do lose some of your humanity, some of your emotions and stuff with it, and eventually, if you're not careful and if things happen, you can slowly lose control of your own self. Lobot in the Lando comic, which I did tackle in episode 18 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, it goes into a lot more detail about Lando and Lobot's relationship. Lobot could actually talk before The Empire Strikes Back, but because of some stuff he had to do, he loses the ability to speak, and the cyborg construct takes over more. And then in the prior arcs with Star Wars, Lobot then had to help the talkie droid speak because his circuits were fried, something along those lines, and in essence, in doing so, Lobot lost more and more of himself. So Lando has got a hump on his shoulder about his best friend, losing even more of himself to the rebellion, a cause that he's still not fully involved with, and that's in short the very, very short version of Lando and Lobot and things. But if you want to hear more about Lobot and you want to hear more about Lando, I would recommend checking out episode 18 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. It is also written by Charles Soule, so there's a couple of cool connections to the Darth Vader comics I'm tackling, the 2017 run, and other stuff as well. So anyway, Luke goes off with Wedge, as I said, to Starlight Squadron to try and find other rebel cells. So Leia, Lando, Chewie, 3PO and Lobot then go to Jakara. Lando is worried about who was above Dryden Voss in Crimson Dawn, and for clarity that was Maul, as I said earlier, which is an understandable thing to be worried about. The Millennium Falcon then arrives at Jakara. It's not quite on the planet yet, it's in the space around the planet, and it shows there's numerous other syndicates around the planet. While this happens, Lando and Lobot secretly eject a talkie droid into space so that Jabba or Jabba's people can pick it up, because Lando sold the rebel secrets to Jabba, who would then sell them to the Empire, and in doing that, you need the talkie droid who's got access to this ancient language, because 3PO managed to extract the ancient language from the talkie droid so that the talkie droid isn't necessary anymore. When it gets ejected into space, the talkie droid does actually give Lobot the ability to speak a little bit more, because it's something about the cyborg construct, there's a way to allow him to talk and stuff, but the droid has already been ejected into space and it is too late, and Lando is quite annoyed about that, and before they can do anything further, Chewie has to move the Millennium Falcon quite fast out of the way of things, which makes Lando fall over, and Leia says, "Come on, you need to come back to the bridge." Lando quietly pledges that he's going to find a way to fix Lobot, and then goes to the bridge. Chewie confirms that they're going to fly to the other side of the planet, then they're going to fly really low undetected to try and get near the Crimson Dawn's base. Lando questions this because using the Millennium Falcon is quite bad considering it's such a recognisable ship, but Leia wants Han to be in a familiar place when he comes to, which is very sweet. A ship comes out of hyperspace right next to the Falcon, and the Falcon catches the edge of the ship. This ship is owned by the Black Sun Syndicate. The Black Sun were one of the syndicates that joined Maul's Shadow Collective during the Clone Wars, which, as I said before, included the Hutts, the Pike Syndicate, Death Watch, and a few other things as well. But yeah, the Black Sun do appear in the Clone Wars series. Because the Falcon catches the Black Sun ship, the Black Sun then sends out a few fighters and things. The Millennium Falcon then dives straight to the planet, goes through some ice cliffs and things, does some manoeuvring, and the other ships crash. The Millennium Falcon does get damaged a little bit from this, but seems to be fine, and then it does like a skid landing. It reminds me a lot, and I think this was intentional, of in The Force Awakens when they land on Starkiller Base. It basically skids across the snow and gets covered in a little bit of snow, so it's got a bit of cover, but seems to be fine. And then the final panel of this comic is the group being able to see the Crimson Dawn's docked ship, and they head over for it. They're still like a mile maybe away, or that sort of distance, but it's all ice and everything around them, and they head for the Crimson Dawn's docked ship, which is basically where this whole auction thing is happening. And that is where Star Wars number 14 ends. So that means we're moving on to the penultimate issue of this chapter, and this is Darth Vader number 13, and it is called The Sound of Metal. The writer for this is Greg Pak, the artist is Raphael Ienco, and the colour artist is Jason Keith, and this issue was released the 23rd of June 2021. Now, to clarify, this is the third run of the Vader comics. I've tackled all of the first run of Vader comics, which was by Kieran Gillen. I've done those in previous episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so check those out. I've recently embarked on the first volume of the 2017 run of Darth Vader, which was written by Charles Soule, and that is set just after Revenge of the Sith. And so this run, the 2020 run, it's set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I haven't tackled the prior issues to this yet, but when I finish the 2017 Vader run, I will eventually get onto this. But you don't need to know the ins and outs of things, and I'll kind of explain little bits as we get through it, but I'm going to read out the crawl. Darth Vader is restored. After Exegol, Vader begins to comprehend the full scope and might of the Emperor's power. He must kneel before his master once more. But Vader's son is a threat to his position. Luke Skywalker must die. Now, Darth Vader and Ochi travel to Boku the Hutt's lair to pick up Luke's trail, a trail that begins by finding Han Solo. So in brief, Exegol, that is the main planet in The Rise of Skywalker, and the 2020 Darth Vader run, it shows how Vader went to Exegol, how Palpatine is there and all that sort of stuff, why Kylo Ren went to Mustafar and found the Wayfinder in the ruins of Vader's fortress. Lots and lots of stuff to unpack there, which I will get onto when I eventually tackle those comics, but that is it in brief. And Ochi, he is Ochi of Bestoon, and he is a character that you see in The Rise of Skywalker. He's the one they find the corpse of, who has the Sith blade. You get a bit more backstory to him in these other comics, but I'm not going to tackle that here. So with that in mind, let's get on to the story of this comic. It shows Vader recounts being put in his place by Palpatine in the previous issues of this arc, and when Obi-Wan said, "Strike me down and I'll become more powerful than you can ever imagine," Vader interprets that as Luke being the one who becomes powerful. So Vader interprets that when Obi-Wan said that, it was actually because Luke would essentially take his place as a Jedi Knight and be able to defeat the Empire. Whether or not that's what Obi-Wan meant, who knows, maybe we will find out someday, but I obviously view it as him becoming a Force ghost, but maybe it was both. It's an interesting interpretation. So he kind of comes out of thinking this, and it shows that he's killing some Gamorrean guards. Gamorrean guards are essentially pig people. They're pig-faced humanoids, they're green-skinned, and you'll see them from Return of the Jedi, because Jabba has a lot of them in his palace, and because they're in front of Boku the Hutt, which is someone who's mentioned in the Hutt Council in the War of the Bounty Hunters 1 I mentioned earlier on, he also has some Gamorrean guards. They're in lots of other Star Wars content, they're in The Mandalorian and things, they're found on the planet Gamorre, and they're pig people. There's not really much else you need to know about them. So Vader killed these Gamorrean guards in front of Boku the Hutt, and it is confirmed that bounty hunters are heading for Boba Fett's last location. But there's one group, which is the Droid Crush, and they are on a certain planet in Hutt space. Now, the Droid Crush, they are also within this Vader comic run of 2020. They're in the first big run of this whole thing. They confront Vader on Mustafar and stuff, but that's all you really need to know about them. So Boku the Hutt takes Ochi and Vader there in this sail barge. It's very similar to the barge that you see in Return of the Jedi, but it can go into space. I don't know if Jabba's can in that, but Boku's can. And they do that because the Imperial shuttle by itself going into Hutt space would just make everyone scatter. So they hide the Imperial shuttle in the barge, and then when the barge gets close enough and clears all the sort of checks and things from people checking and whatnot, the Imperial shuttle then heads down. He goes down to a repair yard, it shoots a lot of different things. The Imperial shuttle is once again the Lambda class T4A shuttle, the box with the fins I always talk about in these recent episodes. And as it is flying overhead, it shoots a few things down at the droid repair yard, and then the ship seems to get sliced, and then it crashes. The droid crash then opened fire, and they are accompanied by IG-88. So this IG-88, this is technically speaking IG-88B. It is the one that you see in Empire Strikes Back, but in the canon there are 5 identical droids which are IG-88. It's IG-88A to IG-88E. They seem to be in this trading card game, which seems to be canon, which is why this IG-88 is IG-88B. God, how many times can I say that in one minute? How many times can you say IG-88? For clarity, IG-11, which you see in the Mandalorian Series 1, is different, but they're generally the same model, kind of the same lines, and in canon it's a little bit hazy as to what the difference are there, another 77 IG units between 11 and 88, even though IG-11 looks the same as IG-88 and there's 5 identical versions of IG-88. It's a little bit of a mess if you ask me. I don't know if they're going to retcon what happened in the trading card game, but at the moment there's not really any backstory for IG-88. The only other bit that we've got is in the Age of Republic Villains special, which has 3 short stories in there. One of those short stories is about IG-88, and for all you lucky people who want to check that out, I tackled that in episode 43 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. IG-88 is also known as a Flut droid. That's with a PH, so PHLUT droid. So IG-88 is there, obviously one of the prolific bounty hunters from Empire Strikes Back, and starts to shoot at Darth Vader. Vader manages to deflect all of the shots and gets closer and closer, and then slices IG-88's weapon. IG-88 then pushes a button which then freezes Vader, and it shows that it was actually in control of his mechanical armor. Vader's a bit confused about that because you would need a specific code to even get access to Vader's armor, and that is not something that he gives out very easily. In fact, I don't think anyone would know that apart from maybe Palpatine, and arguably people who have worked on his armor in the past. So IG uses this armor control code button thing to get Vader to put his lightsaber up to his own neck, and before it slices and ends Vader, Vader uses the Force and gets the remote. Using this remote, Vader then gets IG to shoot himself in the head. And while this happens, Baku, as he sees this all sort of happening and things from his barge, he gets his barge to shoot the planet. But Vader manages to deflect one of the shots with his lightsaber and causes everyone around him to be knocked off their feet. After IG-88 has been bested, the droids then all bail, and Vader gets IG-88's head, and he heads to a terminal. He connects it up and it shows that IG was hired by Crimson Dawn, so Vader goes back to Baku the Hutt, threatens him, and Baku confirms that he was actually the one who betrayed him, and says exactly what Vader wants to hear, which is, you can't beat him. And then later on it shows an IG unit on Coruscant, and it speaks to a character called Slime Moore, who is one of the people who is trying to kill Vader. Now, Slime Moore is a character that I recognised that I had to look up a bit more information. You see her in episodes 2 and 3 of Star Wars, so Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. They are an Umbaran. They basically have very, very pale skin. They wear sort of very, very, very light blue, lavendery sort of coloured things. You see them being around Palpatine quite a lot, and they are actually somewhat Force sensitive as well. They're going to be a bit more central to the next issue of Darth Vader because, in the preview thing at the end of the comic, it shows Vader approaching Slime Moore. But yeah, Slime Moore, I'll go into more detail when they're a more central character, but they are someone you would recognise from the prequels. So I ran through all that quite quickly because most of the Vader comics are quite a lot of either visuals showing visions to like the prequels and the original trilogy, or it's a lot of action. And obviously a lot of action is great for reading. I really recommend people read the Vader comics. All of them are just brilliant. But I don't describe all the details of the action here because I do want you guys to pick up all these comics, even though, there are so many of them in this War of the Bounty Hunters thing. But that is the end of the Darth Vader comic number 13. So with all that in mind, we go on to the last comic of this chapter of the first batch of the War of the Bounty Hunters, and that is Doctor Aphra number 11. And this is the second run of Doctor Aphra. I actually did the last episode of the Doctor Aphra comics last week. So that was episode 63 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. That was the wrapping up episode of the first run of Doctor Aphra, which was done by Kieran Gillen and then finished off by Simon Spurrier. It's really, really good. I do recommend any people, especially if you're a fan of like the older Legends comics of Star Wars, the weird and the wonderful stuff. Doctor Aphra has a lot of that coolness in it. But this is the 2020 run, which is by Alyssa Wong. I will be continuing my Aphra run into this. So in 3 weeks' time, I will be tackling the first volume of this Aphra run. So, by the end of all of the Bounty Hunters, I should have generally caught up with most of the other things in this. But anyway, let's get on to the details of this. So it is Dr. Aphra number 11. It is called Durge. The writer is Alyssa Wong. The penciler is Minkyu Jung. The inker is Victor Olazaba. And the colour artist is Rachel Rosenberg. And this issue was out the 30th of June, 2021. So let's read the crawl for this one. Rogue archaeologist Dr. Aphra and smuggler Sana Starros are working for Domina Taig. The job? Locate Domina's criminal cousin who disappeared after alluding to an incredible opportunity for the Taig Corp. Meanwhile, Just Lucky and Ariel Yu's old mentor have betrayed the Sixth Kin Syndicate, and they've been tasked with infiltrating an exclusive event to eliminate him. Loyalty is in short supply within the Taig Corp and the Sixth Kin. Is Domina's incredible opportunity and the exclusive event one and the same? So if you guys need some background information on Sana Starros, Just Lucky, Ariel, that sort of thing, I gave them all information in the previous War of the Bounty Hunters episode, so episode 60 when I did the prelude, so I'm going to assume you guys listened to that and move on swiftly. But if you've been listening to this show for a while, you'll know that Sana Starros is a comic exclusive character who is, for lack of a better word, a badass. She is a really cool character, and I'm so happy that she's in these Dr. Aphra comics. She has a really, really good level to it. But let's get into things. It starts off with Eben Drake eating this strange exotic caviar, and Eben Drake is the aforementioned cousin of Domina Taig. It shows that Aphra and Sana Starros get to that ship a little bit later on, and it seems that everyone around is dead. Aphra hears something in the vents, and they check the ship, and they find the dead Eben Drake. He shows that his tongue was bitten off, and Aphra finds an invite to Crimson Dawn in his possession, and it mentions that they are auctioning Han Solo, which Sana Starros knows Han Solo very well. When she was first introduced in the second volume of the 2015 Star Wars run, she was actually had this con with him where they fake got married to pull this whole thing. So she has deep connections to Han Solo, and she did travel with Leia, Luke and Han quite a lot in that 2015 run of Star Wars. So as they find out, it cuts to the other storyline that's going on with this, which is Just Lucky and Ariel Yu. They're on a ship and discussing a plan. In essence, they need to kill a character called Cray, and they've known Cray since they were children. They were kind of childhood friends. Meanwhile, back with Aphra and Sana, a character called Durge appears, requesting Aban. He then sees that Aban is dead, and then some things called Cymotes attack. They're basically purple slugs that have got sharp bits on them, and these things are pretty fearsome. They seem to attack everything, and there are just swarms of them. But I want to take a pause here and address the character called Durge. Now, Durge is a massive character in Legends, but in canon, this is his first appearance, which is very exciting. I was so surprised when I saw Durge at the preview at the end of Dr. Aphra number 10. So what can I tell you about Durge then? Well, he was first in Legends. He was introduced in the 51st Republic comic, which is basically connected to the Clone Wars multimedia project. When the 2D animated Clone Wars series came out, which is now on Disney+, it's the Clone Wars micro series. There were lots of little 5-minute episodes, and on Disney+, they've just combined it. Series 1 and Series 2 that are 40 minutes long each. They are Legends, they're no longer canon, but there's a lot of stuff there, which is it's fairly interesting. It's quite cool if you like that sort of thing. And Durge was the main antagonist in one of those things. In Legends, he was 3 meters tall, he was over 2,000 years old, and he was a species called the Gen Dai. He seems to be basically unkillable. In the Clone Wars series, once again, this is the 2D animated one, not the canon one that's 3D animated with Ahsoka and stuff. This was before all of that. And the 2D animated Clone Wars series kind of served as a prequel sort of to Revenge of the Sith before canon Legends was a sort of thing. Bit of a mess, but still, this character Durge, he gets his arm sliced off, and then he's made out of these strange tentacle fiber things that can just reattach limbs and whatnot. He's very, very hard to kill. In Legends, he was killed by Anakin Skywalker, basically force pushed him into a sun. That was basically the only way to kill him. But this is his first appearance in canon. He's still a bounty hunter. There's no confirmation of his species, his age, or even really his height. So all of that information I told you, that is from Legends, and we'll just have to see if that has been carried over to this canon. But he is a very, very cool character. So back to the story, these slug things, the Psymotes, as I said, they are attacking Aphra, Sana and Durge. They are running and trying to discuss the weaknesses, and it's confirmed that the main weakness of them is a change in air pressure. So it's confirmed that they need to trap the Psymotes in an airlock. They manage to run away, and Durge is shooting a lot of them, and this comic is really cool. There's some brilliant panels of Durge in this, and they manage to lure them into the airlock. Durge runs in there while shooting them, and as Sana runs into the airlock as well, Aphra stops, pulls Sana out, and then presses the button. Durge yells out that we had a deal. Aphra says, "Did we?" with a little smirk on her face, presses the button, and then Durge and all of the Psymotes are sucked into space. All of the Psymotes pop, and Durge just floats away. And this comic then ends with Aphra contacting Domina Taig, and she asks Aphra and Sana to go to this auction that Crimson Dawn are hosting, to get info on both Crimson Dawn's operations as well as all of the other syndicates that are there, because obviously Crimson Dawn coming out of the woodwork after so long is very much a curious thing, and Domina Taig wants to see sort of the end game. And that's where that comic ends. I want to clarify, I am highly doubtful that that is the end of Durge. I do not believe they'll bring back such a massive character from Legends and then just have him killed in one comic immediately. My suspicion, and I haven't read the next Aphra comic yet or anything like that, my suspicion is that Durge is going to be quite a bit more in this War of the Bounty Hunters thing, and then he's going to either be the main antagonist for Dr. Aphra, or maybe he'll even have his own series. I don't really know, but because Durge was so big in Legends, I can't see this being his death in canon. I am certain he's going to appear elsewhere. I would not actually be surprised if he showed up in the upcoming Book of Boba Fett series, or Series 3 of The Mandalorian, or anything like that, because he's borderline unkillable. You see him get out of some incredible situations in Legends, so I just want to flag that to you guys as well. But that, my friends, is the end of the first chapter, or the second chapter if you want to be pedantic, of the War of the Bounty Hunters. As I said, I will be tackling this each month, I'm basically a month behind when the releases are coming out. So in the month of July, the second chapter of all the War of the Bounty Hunter stuff comes out. So any of you guys who are trying to do what I'm doing, which is read all 34 issues of this crossover event, it will give you a good amount of time to be able to read them before, tackling them on this show. But most people I've seen who are involved with this, who are interested in the Star Wars comics, some of them are just picking up the main mini-series of War of the Bounty Hunters, just those, the Alpha and the other 5 issues, which gives the main plot, but, I want to do it all, and I'm collecting these issues anyway, so I thought it's a good way to kind of give the background information for people who want the extra amount of content around the War of the Bounty Hunters, sort of massive crossover, without having to pick up 34 individual issues. So that'll be back in a month's time. What we've got coming up next week is going to be the next volume in the main run of Star Wars comics. We're getting near the end of the 2016 run of Star Wars. I think there's 2 collections left. I think one is Rogues and Rebels and the other one is Rebels and Rogues. So that all leads on to the rebellion getting onto Hoth, which obviously is where Empire Strikes Back starts. So it's probably going to be another 2 episodes of the main run of Star Wars before I get to that finale. The week after that, so episode 66 of Comics and Canon, that is going to be more than likely the next volume of the Darth Vader comics. I will flag here that in August I am going away. Well, I said going away. I'm travelling around England with Megan for 2 weeks, and in that time I will not be releasing any podcasts necessarily, or at least if I release them, they won't be like this. In my Patreon, so patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat, I release afterthoughts on there that me and Megan talk about movies. We've spoken about the Star Wars movies, as well as loads of other films and some new stuff like Black Widow. That's going to be releasing soon. And Luca and In the Heights and Cruella. Those ones are all spoiler free for brand new films. But because me and Megan have spoken about them quite a lot, what my plan is probably going to be is that I will release a couple of those as a sort of placeholder. So any of you listeners, you can get the gist of what you can expect on my Patreon. You get access to stuff on Patreon, which is kind of fun. And also you still get a little bit of a Star Wars fix as well. So that's probably what I'm going to do. If anyone has some massive objections to that, please let me know. But I will not be able to read all the Star Wars comics and things while I am on holiday. And so I'll figure it out from there. I may end up sort of making War of the Bounty Hunters come out a bit sooner rather than having to wait. Because if it's going to be 2 weeks, that's going to put everything on a 2-week delay. And for War of the Bounty Hunters, I want to try and keep that fairly current. So that's a general idea of what is coming up. Aside from that, in the description, I always include links to what I've been sort of getting up to and things. I've been on the I Like to Like Things podcast. Myself and Chris did an hour-long discussion on The Black Widow, which is on the feed of Comics in Motion as well. Also, myself, Tonya, Todd, and Megan have done an episode on the first 3 episodes of the Loki series. Tonight, as of recording this, I'm recording this on Thursday, the 15th of July, I'm going to be doing the next batch, so it will be episodes 4 to 6 of the Loki series with Tonya and Megan. So that will be released within a week of this episode dropping as well. There is also going to be an episode that's coming out soon of Mandatory Marvel and DC, where I appeared on that once again, and me and Max finished off our sort of Joker comic trilogy. It started off with Killing Joke, then we did the New 52 Death of the Family, and then we're doing Endgame, which is volume 7 of the New 52 of the Batman and stuff. So that was a lot of fun as well, and we've already got plans to do another episode of Mandatory Marvel and DC together, and we're actually going to tackle something Marvel related, but I will leave that for a future episode. Aside from that, guys, it's the usual things. Check out my show, Genuine Chit-Chat. I have a different guest on each episode. I have a wide variety of guests and whatnot. So, check that out if you quite like the interview-style podcasts, and they're quite informal. I've had many people from Comics in Motion and the extended Comics in Motion family on there. I've done a huge amount of topics. There's loads of cool stuff there, so I'm not going to narrow on about that. I mentioned about my Patreon earlier, patreon.com/Genuine Chit-Chat. If you can't get enough of my voice, you already listen to Genuine Chit-Chat. You are obviously listening to Star Wars Comics in Canon right now, and you want even more content, and you also would like to support the show and fuel my comic addiction of Star Wars to let me keep doing this show, as well as just the general costs of podcasting, then head over there, because for as little as £1 a month you get sent a RSS feed link, which you can pop that into relatively any of the places you listen to podcasts, and it'll give you access to the Patreon feed. On that Patreon feed there will be at least one episode of Afterthoughts every week, which, as I said, 10 to 20 minutes usually of me and Megan talking about a film. The new ones, we do spoiler-free stuff, but some of the older films, we, do spoilers and stuff. We've done series as well. We did series 1 of The Witcher, we did The Queen's Gambit, and we've done a few others. There's a documentary series we did as well, Murder Among the Mormons, that was cool. And there's a few other, movies and things we've got on the list to do. And in addition to that, any listeners of Genuine Chit-Chat knows that when I have an extra long episode, I split them in 2. I release part 1 one week and then part 2 the following week. And on the Patreon feed, you get access to both parts unsplit when part 1 drops as well. So if you really want to support the show, you go over to patreon.com/Genuine Chit-Chat. I have included a link to that in the description, and there is also a link to listening to mine and Megan's Afterthoughts on Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire. Megan absolutely slated that film. I enjoyed it more than she did. I've seen it, years ago when it came out and things, but if you want to hear a half an hour discussion on that and you want to get a taster of what Afterthoughts is like, that's a perfect place to listen to it, because I've made that episode for free, so you don't need to be a Patreon for that. But anyone who's willing to support the show, you get all of those extras and things. And if you're willing to support the show for £2 a month instead of £1 a month, you also get access to the full Patreon feed on Patreon. You get access to all the audio stuff as well that the £1 tier gets access to, but you also get access to the future guest lists that I put up once a month. On generally Thursdays, I release the Star Wars Comics in Canon photos. So normally on social media on a Saturday, I release, confirmation of this episode that drops, as well as certain photos of the comics. If you want to get early access to that as well, on Thursdays I normally drop those if you donate £2 a month or more. There's the future guest lists. There's already all the audio things you get. You get extra photos and things of like my tortoises. I occasionally put a photo of Wicket on there, which is my tortoise, and occasionally have brother Humphrey, who occasionally comes around for a visit as well. So if you just want to get more of an insight into what goes on with Genuine Chit-Chat and Star Wars Comics in Canon, you want early access to stuff, you want the exclusive Afterthought shows, and you want to help support the show, all of those things are available at patreon.com/Genuine Chit-Chat. I do appreciate each and every one of you listening to Star Wars Comics in Canon, and many of you who also listen to Genuine Chit-Chat, and it means the absolute world to me that you guys do listen. But also, if you support me on Patreon, you get one portion of my undying love, because anyone willing to donate money, it means the world to me, and I try and give you as much bonus content as possible. So aside from that, guys, make sure you check out Genuine Chit-Chat's YouTube channel. It basically just puts all of these episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon into playlists. There's the Darth Vader playlist, the Doctor Aphra, the main run of Star Wars ones. There's ones which are just about specific character bios. So if you just want to get like episodes about specific characters like Darth Maul, Count Dooku, or episodes that include characters from the prequel era or the sequel era, make sure you go over to Genuine Chit-Chat on YouTube, because I put them into nice little playlists. And on that channel, it's got all my Genuine Chit-Chat episodes, some of them with video as well as all of these episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon. And if you're already listening on there, thank you very much for listening on YouTube. I appreciate it greatly. But that's really enough from me, guys, I think. So, thank you as always for listening. Make sure you check out all the other amazing shows on the feed of Comics in Motion if you're listening to this on the podcasting apps and whatnot, like Spotify and things. There's a new show almost every day of the week, and they are all just absolutely incredible. And aside from that, guys, thank you as always for listening. I'll talk to you next Saturday, and may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.